who joins us live from Melbourne. Thanks very much for being there.
G'day, Peter.
Appreciate your patience. Let me get your reaction to this. Why call it Labor's bank deposit tax, where Joe Hockey, alongside the Labor Party as a follow-up to the Labor Party in April this year, said that he was looking at including the bank deposit tax in the May budget?
Well, it's Labor's bank deposits tax because they're the ones that introduced it back in 2013. They put it in the forward estimates, they spent against it, but they, of course, never legislated for it. Now, we've made the decision today that we are not going to proceed with this bank deposits tax, and it will be another tax which we are taking off the agenda to make it easier for the Australian public on their cost of living and on their general taxes on business.
But it was no more their tax than yours. They may have had it in the forward estimates, but as you say, it wasn't legislated. It was in your forward estimates as well. That's why the Treasurer in April said that he was planning to continue to include it in the May budget, which you did.
Well, they're the ones that introduced it back in 2013, and at the time, if you go back and look at when they did introduce it, Peter,
but it wasn't legislated.
I think you'll find that we called it right then and there that this was just an ordinary tax on everyday depositors,
but it wasn't,
and we were against it at the time.
But it wasn't legislated, and then you said via an interview with the Treasurer to the AFR on the 12th of April that you were going to keep it.
Well, we've made the decision today, Peter, not to proceed with this. We said all along, right at the get-go, we said we didn't like this tax. We then said when we came into government that we'd put this decision to the David Murray inquiry. David Murray came back and his recommendation was also not to proceed with this bank deposits tax. So we've accepted that recommendation, and instead what we've asked the banks to do, in line with the David Murray inquiry, is to increase their overall capital. And so that's what they're doing. So we don't need this bank deposits tax, and what that will end up doing is make it easier for everyday Australians because they won't have this tax on their deposits, and only the Labor Party is proceeding with it.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, the point that the Treasurer made was that, exactly as you've just said then, Alan Tudge, because of the capital requirements that have been progressed with, therefore you don't need the bank deposits tax, which was what Murray said. The Labor Party, presumably, will now take the same view. They didn't have the capital requirements back then. Now that we do have them, this tax that both sides of politics was supporting now can go.
Well, they had the choice at the time. They could have also gone down that path of increasing the capital, but they didn't.
So could you in April. So could you in April when the Treasurer decided on the exact same thing as the Labor Party.
We said we would follow a proper process, Peter. We were against it when Labor introduced it. We said when we came into government that we'd put it to the David Murray inquiry. That's what we did. And David Murray came back and said, here's the proper course of action. And we, of course, in our DNA, we want to get rid of taxes. We want to lower taxes. That's why we scrapped the mining tax. That's why we scrapped the carbon tax. That's why we've lowered tax on small business. And this is another measure which reduces the tax burden on everyday Australians. And now it's up to the Labor Party. The Labor Party should come out today and say that they support this measure, that they support getting rid of Labor's deposits tax once and for all.
But it was a tax that was to be paid by the banks rather than paid by individual customers. Don't get me wrong, I know that they would pass it on, but equally the capital requirements is going to result in the banks, if they want to maintain their profits, having to pass on some form of fee rise as well. It's really 6 of one or half a dozen of the other, isn't it?
Well, the tax was a direct tax, just so that your viewers understand this. It was a tax on every single bank deposit in the nation, and it was going to raise $1.5 billion. And so, inevitably, that was going to get passed on to everyday customers. Now, this was on top, of course, on top of Labor's desperate grab for deposits which were left stationary for several years. Labor passed a measure which, if a deposit was left stationary for several years without being touched, then Labor would just grab that money. Now, we've also reversed that decision, so that if that money's there, it is your money, it's not the government's money. And likewise here, if you've got a bank deposits there, we don't want to be touching it, we don't want to be taxing it, rather we want to reduce your tax burden. And that's one of the key differences now between the Coalition and the Labor Party. We want to reduce taxes, they typically want to raise them.
Alan Tudge, I like the ultimate decision, but it just makes me wonder what on earth the government was thinking back on the 12th of April when you were looking at actually implementing it. But unfortunately...
But Peter, we went through a process. Now, you sometimes criticise us, but we went through a thorough process here where we said what we would do and we did what we said and then we made a conclusion. That's what we've done. That's what good government is about.
All right, I'd like to have got on, but we need to get to a break. Apologies about that. The Prime Minister stole both of our thunder on this one. Appreciate you joining us, Alan Tudge, Parliamentary Secretary to the PM.
Peter.
Thank you very much.